everyone for coming to our little panel on gaming in the classroom, how games can improve our schools. My name is Nik Davidson. I am the least interesting person up here. I would love for our panelists to take a moment and introduce themselves. We have noticed sort of a gap at PAX specifically. There was a panel 2 years ago on gaming and education, and it filled a room about this size, and there wasn't one last year. And our panelists realized that they could do something about it, so here we are. Unlike a lot of panels on this topic, discussions on this topic, we are going to be less focused on kind of the theory of games in education and why games are good for learning, because I think we all know that. Instead, I've got a couple of teachers and students up here that have actually been implementing games in the classroom, so I would like you to please welcome our panelists.
Hi, my name is Andrew Miller. I teach English and social studies, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, as well as like tech courses. I actually do teach a game design class online, so I can have fun with kids doing that. In addition to that, I do a lot of what's called educational consulting, which means I go around and I do workshops, professional development with teachers. And one of those subjects is how to use game in the classroom educational technology. And I also do regular blogging for Edutopia, which is a nonprofit, and I do a lot of blogs on that subject as well as other things. So it's definitely one of my passions and why I want to be here and talk about it, because it can happen.
My name is Jeremy Bort. I am a 6th grade language arts, history, and creative writing teacher in Federal Way, Washington at a school. I first started thinking about games and education a very long time ago when I realized I was learning more history from Sid Meier and Civilization than I was from my 7th grade history teacher. And now that I am that 6th grade history teacher, I do a lot of work with games in the classroom. I also run the after-school gaming club at my school and do some things in the school setting as well.
My name is Christian Knutson. I'm a student at Thomas Jefferson High School. I first met Mr. Bort when I was in his class in 6th grade. It was the first time that I ever experienced games in the classroom in the sense where you were learning from them and reviewing content and such like that. I later became ASB Director of Technology at my high school and decided that it would be wonderful to come back and help out with this panel.
My name is Nik Davidson. I'm a game designer at Wizards of the Coast. I've had a lifelong relationship with learning as a game designer, because that's core to the art of game design. You need to be able to teach in order for people to play and enjoy. And I've always known that there were always two types of middle school students. There were middle school students who knew what prestidigitation was and how to spell it, and those that didn't play D&D. I know, right? So, just quick show of hands, just to get a sense of who's in the room. How many teachers do we have here today? Awesome. Thank you for being here. How many students? Welcome. 3-day weekend. Parents. And any game designers looking to pick up some tips. Fantastic. How many of you raised 2 or more hands? That's not true. You raised only 1 hand each time. Twice or more. Gotcha. So I'll start off with kind of the high-level topic. Why are we here? Why games in the classroom? Set the stage for us here.
Well, I think when I think of this topic, I think about what our system doesn't do that games do in the place of that. And I think one of the big things that we talk about assessment in the education field a lot, grading, non-grading, all those good things. And I think that what games do perfectly that schools do not do is give that timely assessment and feedback. We've all been in that situation where we hand in some assignment and we're like, I would love some feedback. And you don't get it. And you wait for 2 weeks and then you get it and it's totally not helpful. So I think that's one of the things that games do really well, right? You get that timely feedback, you can do that effectively, as well as the whole idea of the freedom to fail. Everyone in this room has experienced schooling where you fail at something and you're punished for it, right? You're graded on it. You get an F. And, oh, I'm sorry, that's too bad for you. Games don't do that. Games don't do that. And I think that if we could be more like that, I think those are the two things that I would love to see.
Just as a very general statement, games make classrooms better for teachers and students. And a lot of what Andrew was saying, I completely agree with. The whole feedback piece that everyone, and I'm not being exact on there, but everyone is a gamer today, whether they are playing casual games on their phone, whether they are playing sports, which is the subset of games that PAX tends not to talk about, or whether they are, you know, a hardcore WoW raider, or they're playing League of Legends and trying to be, or Dota, sorry, trying to be professional. That people are playing games all the time, and so the students that we are getting are expecting the type of things that games give them. They're conditioned for it. There are really three things games bring to my classroom. The immediacy of feedback for the educators in this room. They are a fantastic way of formatively assessing your students. They give a motivation that students can find lacking when you tell a student something is an assignment and you tell a student something is a game. If they're very close to the same thing, that terminology, you know, okay, I'll play a game. And we all know we learn by playing. Play is how humans learn in a large way, and so giving a space for students to play and be at that game where there, as Andrew said, there aren't the consequences for failure, that it really heightens learning in a classroom.
Yeah, and one of my favorite experiences going through this sort of way of teaching was that when Mr. Bort was using games in the classroom, it allowed the students to communicate on a means, because like when I do a group project, I mean, I'll talk to the people I'm with, but when you're in a game and it's either competitively or maybe it's not competitively and it's cooperative, but if it's competitive and it's cooperative, which in my opinion is one of my favorite types of games, you're allowed to group up with your teammates and you learn the content, and then you're allowed to earn a goal or a reward or anything, and in this case it's learning, and that just makes all of it better.
So let's just kind of go over an example of what this looks like in practice. You want to bring up? Okay. So what are we looking at here?
So this is an example from my 6th grade history class, and it was either a year, might have been this year, might have been last year. I teach ancient world history, and there's a lot of content in there that is not the most inherently engaging for 6th graders. Not that anybody in my class has ever been bored ever. Yeah. So I came up with a series of games, one to review every major unit in my 6th grade Ancient Civilizations class. And my goals for this were several-fold. One, and one of the most important, was they had to learn something about what we were studying by playing the game. I came to this because a lot of teachers, when they are reviewing for a test, even if they don't think of themselves as game teachers, play some version of Jeopardy to review test questions. And I was bored out of my skull with Jeopardy. So I went, how can I, as somebody who's been playing games all of my life, as somebody who has done some amateur game design, come up with something that not only lets me know where my students are, but serves the students as well. So this was and I wish I had a laser pointer right now. This was a game on ancient Mesopotamia, and we were studying the very first cities that came about, and the idea was that, what is a civilization? That was the concept that I needed them to get. Something marked by a high degree of organization in government, religion, and trade. And we were also studying how division of labor led to food surpluses. So they were able to get surplus food, and then as a team, purchase different levels of organization in government, religion, or trade. And they had to make a strategic choice as a team whether they were going to jack of all trades and build up their personal civilization in each level, or whether they were going to, double down in government. And every round, a die would be rolled in either government, religion, or trade was going to be what was important to that civilization. To play this game, they were in teams of 4, and they had a whiteboard between them, and I had a list of the questions that were going to be coming up on their test. And again, for those educators in the room, these questions range from, if you're familiar with Bloom's or Costa's, they're ranging from level 1 to level 3, or however you're dividing it up, based on what I want to see. And I would ask a test question, and the team would then get together and decide on what answer they're going to write on the whiteboard. This allowed, as Christian said, for cooperativeness in my classroom. A strong student's like, okay, I know what this is, I can help out my team. A student who is like, I'm not really sure on this, gets to hear it verbally again. And one of the requirements was they pass the whiteboard around so nobody's doing all the writing. So there's a good chance that somebody who was wondering about it physically writes the answer again and reviews it. Then all the teams raised their board above their heads, and I scored each of them, which gave me a very good idea where my class level was in preparation for our end of unit assessment. And so my games start off at the beginning of the year very, very simple mechanics, because everyone comes with a different level of experience in games, and get progressively more complicated. And this was it was a hobby of mine to design all of these. And so yeah, it teaches them something, it serves a whole lot of purposes. And I actually had a student come up to me last year who really had little internal motivation for studying for a test. But he knew after a couple of units that there was going to be a game right before it. He came, I'm going to win this game. And so that was his goal. And so he studied his tail off to win the game. And that he knew it for the test later that week was irrelevant to him, but hey, it worked for me.
And I would just add that, like, what Jeremy's doing is, is literally he's designing games for the classroom. And for a lot of teachers out there, I just want to say there's a lot of implementation levels of what this can look like. It can look like gamification in the sense that you're applying game mechanics to your classroom. You have boss levels, you have quests. Then there's also just the giant umbrella of game-based learning where you're like a game, where you try to give timely feedback using tools, where you use digital games. Again, so game-based learning and gaming in schools is a pretty big umbrella, and there's lots of ways to do it, but it really just draws on what games do well, and teachers out there can find these tools or create these tools as well.
So, question for Christian then, what does that do to the social dynamics of a classroom when instead of just kind of sitting there and receiving information, you get put into this sort of context?
Well, one of my favorite parts about it was that Mr. Bort would always do it with the reward system, and so it would make studying a lot more entertaining and competitive, therefore. But one of my favorite parts about having these group games and the way that Mr. Bort set this up is that even students that were struggling with the content could still feel like they were achieving something, because while they were struggling, you could have 1 or 2 people in their group that knew the content well enough where you could all gather together, you could put the board up together, and then the entire group feels like they've achieved something, and it really brings the group together and the whole classroom as a group together too.
One of 2 big lessons that I've learned from this, and I've been doing these for 7 years or so, depending on the game, and this was a student's idea that brought it up to me about 2 years ago. I always gave a prize to the winning team of the game. And depending on what game we were playing, it was usually some form of candy that had something to do, it was usually some stupid pun that I made up. Like if you were going for treasure, like there was a game with the ancient Greeks in which all of the students were going and raiding different polises that their neighbors had, and whoever ended up with the most treasure won, because it's ancient Greece. And so they got small chocolate gold coins because they got the most treasure. When there were some that I turned Reese's upside down, and those are crowns. But I realized a couple years ago to implement a second reward structure in there, that there was a sportsmanship award as well. And I would tell this to them right off the bat, that there is a reward, there is a prize for winning the game, and there is a prize for being the team that is the best sport. And this kept those teams that are looking at the game going like, we can't catch up. Like, this team is like knows everything and they're making all the right strategic choices. We can't get there. But they know that if there's a sportsmanship where like, we're out of here, but we're out of this game mostly, though if it's a well-designed game that doesn't happen all that often, but they can keep working towards something and still study. So there was a sportsmanship award, and I told them that this is my call. Sometimes the team in last place, sometimes the team in first place gets both of them. I tell them you have to choose another team to give that to. Sometimes it's a team in the middle. It's the team that is being the best sports in the class. The other big learning that I had was that games, by definition, have to be voluntary. If you tell a student, you are playing a game, it's not a game anymore, it's a really convoluted assignment. So, now that doesn't have to mean you have to provide them even choices. A lot of times, like, you can play our study game to study with us, or you can do the practice test again.
Yeah, which one sounds better?
I don't often have students do the practice test, but sometimes I do. Maybe they're just having a really rotten day and don't want to talk to people. And that's okay, because if I force them to play a game then, they're not going to get much out of it, and it's not going to serve its purposes. So if you are doing games in your classroom and you want them to be games and not convoluted assignments, they are optional, and you have one or more paths that students can do that will accomplish most of the same task in a different manner.
And that's just good teaching. That's just differentiated instruction right there. That's all that is meeting the needs of your kids where at providing options and paths. And so what he's doing is, yeah, some of the choices look more, appealing than others, but it's okay if a kid doesn't do it. They're still gonna learn the material.
So one of the things that we talked about last week was the emphasis on kind of standards-based and outcome-based education. That there's a lot of structure imposed upon teachers onto the subject matter that you're teaching. So how do you reconcile the flexibility that you need to implement a game for the classroom with the fact that you are in many cases teaching to a test?
Right. There's a couple things that I want to add to this one. So number one, games are perfect, what we call performance assessments. That's what they are. When you beat a game, you have shown that you have mastered those skills or content that the game is asking for. There's a really funny paradigm in that James Paul G, if anybody knows him, he's a great writer around this work, and he does this really funny metaphor. And he says, so let's say you were playing Halo on hard, and you beat it. And then you said, hey, now here's the test on Halo. What? That makes no sense, right? What sense does that make? So I would actually argue that Jeremy's game, in and of itself, is a performance assessment, and he doesn't need to give a test afterwards because kids won the game. So I think that's going to push against the system of standardized testing, and more you will see, even with the Common Core and what those tests are looking like, they're more performance-based, actually. They're looking less and less like the tests of old. The last one I would say about that and how it kind of works with it is that I'm sure many people, we talk about the 4 C's. Like when we, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. Christian and I were talking about this, and he perked up and he said, absolutely, this is what games are about. And I would think that most of us think that these are just as important as the content that we teach in our classrooms. And anytime you're playing these games, you're working on these things. And those things are translatable regardless of the content you're attacking. This could be science, this could be math, doesn't matter. If you're doing a game, you're working on these things, and that in turn is going to help them anywhere they go.
And from my perspective, first of all, there's a lot of things that can be said about the Common Core, for and against. And I'm not getting into that right now, but for all of standards-based education, it's here's a target. Here is how you are getting to this. And some of the people who have developed Common Core have been very adamant about saying, this is not a curriculum, it's a goal. How you get there is entirely up to the teacher. Now, some states and districts and principals have taken it among themselves to say, here is something that was developed for the Common Core, you have to use that. I am very fortunate that I am not in one of those buildings. So here's the goal, here's how I'm getting to it. I can go ahead and develop classroom-based games if my students are getting to that goal, and I can say, here's some evidence for it. And getting from a little bit of practical about what Andrew said about taking the Halo test. In a lot of ways, I do need to have evidence that students have met this goal. So, and individual students that have some knowledge. And so there are times when I can say, oh hey, here's a performance test. You guys accomplished this together. You guys have met your communication standard, whatever it is. Right. There are some that are content standards that I just need to know if you, student A, know this material, and I can either hear you say it or have a piece of paper that I can show your parents at student-led conferences that says, okay, this is my proof that they met that. So there is, in standards-based education, depending on where you are, there's a lot of flexibility that you have to get to the target. How you get there? Yeah. Oftentimes, games are your best route.
So let's say you're in one of the districts that doesn't give you as much flexibility. You are being handed a curriculum. You are being handed not just the goal, but the method. What can you do in that spot?
Well, I think the easiest way is again, it's when we think about it, it can be a supplement to the curriculum that you already have. So if you have a textbook, if you've got a certain binder that like I had, like here's your curriculum, and they put it in front of you, you're like, okay, I used it as I teach online, and that is also very prescribed curriculum. I use it as supplemental materials, as differentiation. So for example, if I'm seeing a student that's not meeting that benchmark, as Jeremy's saying, I go, okay, well here's a game. How would you like to work on this to either try the material in a different way? Because we know that's good teaching, right? If you notice a student is not meeting a certain objective, you find different ways to help that student meet that objective. So I think they can just be another supplement to the curriculum that will help kids. And like we're saying, we have kids that play games. It's gonna work with those kids, as well as frankly every kid, because every kid plays a game.
There's two words that can help answer that: relationships and data. And you should have a good relationship with your supervisors, whether it, probably with your principal, maybe somebody at the district, depending on who you are as a teacher. But if you are at a place where this is your prescribed thing, you are teaching this, and you go up to somebody who you have a good professional relationship with, who trusts you as a teacher, you know your job, and you say, hey, I'm gonna try this, and I'm gonna keep track of data.
Data's the magic word.
Yeah. And if you can say, okay, we're going to keep track of this, and going through the textbook got these results, and playing games got these results, people tend not to complain when you're doing better. So, but again, the key thing is relationships. Talk to people. Hey, I would like to try this. It depends on your building.
Right.
So, once you've been through this and you've kind of experienced these games, does it change, like just for Christian, does it change how you view games? Does it change how you play games, seeing them in this different context?
Well, it was funny because Andrew had mentioned we were talking about the 4 C's, and we were talking about, when we first met each other, we were talking about what games we played, and then as soon as Andrew brought up the 4 C's, I started going back and thinking through all my games that I played, and I realized that basically every single game that you play has some sort of learning for you to gather or grow from. So.
Like pick a game as an example.
Oh gosh, well, Dota. I just ended playing Dota, and there you go. Any game, I mean, you can pick random ones, and you can find something that would go off at least one of the communication, collaboration, all those things.
So how do your parents feel about that?
Oh gosh. My parents do not see the light of
Are they in the room right now?
No, they're not.
That's kind of a wasted opportunity. Are they going to watch the video?
There's a video.
There's a video camera, so
right.
maybe I can get them to watch that.
So Christian's parents, just for you guys. We have a lot of well-certified people who are telling you that your son should be allowed to play a little more Dota than you're comfortable. It's just science.
Let me tell another story about how students change how they see games. This past year, I was coming into my classroom to set it up a couple of days ago, and one of my former students who was in Christian's class is now at the high school, and his younger brother is going to be at my school next year. And he sought me out to say hi when he was registering his younger brother, and specifically came up to say, I am now playing those type of review games in my head every time I study for a test. So he is continuing to do this, like the skills are taught through this.
So, obviously we've got some skills that are learned from games in general. Maybe Dota's not my first pick, but what sorts of games would you direct your students to outside of the classroom for benefits?
Well, I put up some of my favorites, the ones that either I've used or I've seen teachers use in the classroom. I'm sure many of you look at this.
So Angry Birds, seriously?
Yes, physics.
Yes.
No, physics, vectors.
Math.
Right,
Yes.
math, thank you. So, I'm just saying, I've seen teachers, and you can actually find articles about teachers using Angry Birds to teach physics and math concepts. You can do things around, math is of course in Minecraft. We can do scale, ratio, proportion. We can do historical, accuracy. There's a bunch of concepts there. Portal, hello. Do I really need to go more? I used Settlers a lot in my humanities class, to work with kids because it teaches you some of those basic economic principles. World of Warcraft, I talk about that one a lot too, and there's curriculum out there you can go and find. It's written by a colleague of mine that teaches narrative writing, reading, and they teach it alongside with The Hobbit. You can you can go to the auction house and learn really quickly all about economics. I'm just saying, okay? And of course, so these are just some of the ones that, during that civilization. So there's a choice here. You can use what they call literally just off-the-shelf games were maybe not intended, quote unquote, for educational purposes, even though we would all say they are educational, but they're not, made for school in that way. But you can, use them as a tool and create curriculum around it. Or you can go and, you can find some prepackaged games that are quote unquote educational. I think that's actually a big thing that's happening right now. There's some good companies out there that are trying to make some games. But I will ask you this as you go and you look for this stuff, whether it's for the iPad, whether it's for your phone, whether it's on the computer, ask yourself, is it a game or is it an app? That's a very important thing because people are saying they're giving games, but they're really apps. And we all know here, that games are different than just an app. So kind of keep that as a reflective question in your head as you go and search.
So just for clarification, what is your definition of the two?
Here we go. So I think one of the most key things is authentic scenario and challenge, and I mean that word very intentionally, authentic. Where you have to learn the content to accomplish the task in a very authentic and real feeling, place where there is a narrative there, there's a story there, there's a feeling of accomplishment attached. You're not just popping bubbles to solve math problems. You know what I mean? Like that to me is more of an app. And then of course we talk about games are constructed in a way where it's that game flow, right? It's just the right amount of challenge. Apps aren't always created like that. They're just go and you continue to play them and they either don't get very much more challenging or they're just not designed from that game designer lens. So those are two kind of major things I look for.
What the games you're looking for, it really depends, again, on your location as an educator. Things are getting better recently, but I teach in a school which is, shall we call it, technology challenged.
Yes.
Or at least it has been historically, we are slightly less than 600 kids, and there are, I should know this, I'm running technology, about 80 computers that they can access for those kids. We don't have a lot of time for me to go into the computer lab and say, hey, we're going to play World of Warcraft for a week. That'd be great, because other teachers need those computers, which is one of the reasons that I have focus more on in-class games, things that I can do on my whiteboard or things students can play with each other that they have created. Board games and card games are really where I head because I don't have the technology resources like they do in the neighboring district where every kid has a laptop. So, for example, I wanted to teach kids vocabulary, so we made a card game out of it. And, if you're an educator in here, you might be familiar with the Freyer model, that we modified it, that they had a vocabulary word on the front of the card, they had a picture on the front of the card. On the back was a definition and an example sentence. And there were games where students, and they got to pick, could either play competitively in a vocabulary game against somebody else, like, I'm going to get you with vocabulary, and playing with that, or play cooperatively against a board mechanic. And so this was something that I could do, not for buying computers, but for making a trip down to the supply room for 3x5 cards and cutting them in half. So, also, I run the after-school gaming club. We do a lot of gaming outside of the classroom, and Goodwill has all sorts of games you can get for $1.50.
Awesome. So if you're interested in the topic on more of a academic level, what sort of books and supplemental materials would you recommend? I mean, you've brought some props on stage.
If you have to read this book, it is Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal. It is a fantastic book. It is not exclusively focused on education, but it will give you a very clear idea of what a game is, why they're important, what they can do. Now, she has a lot in here on education, but a lot of the stuff that is just more general, I've gone and highlighted and put a star beside and said, aha, education, I can use this in my classroom. So this is the #1 on my list for where to start.
Yeah, the other one I mentioned James Pelchy. He's got a lot of scholarly articles out there. I would consider him a cultural broker for games in the education world. He's got my favorite book where it really got me into this was What Do Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy? Again, the title is What Do Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy? And I can give you that book, and that's where if you want to see a very direct connection, like here it is in the learning theory. Like you can literally nerd out to that if you want to. I know I did.
Also, how many people in here know extra credits? If you are an extra credits fan, it's just great for learning about games. It's a web series. I believe it's hosted on YouTube now if you search for extra credits. There's all sorts of good information. They have at least one episode specifically on gaming and education that has some really good ideas about where you can go.
I would also recommend Glued to Games by Scott Rigby. He's a researcher down in Florida that has come in from sort of the psychology of games and what creates compelling experiences. Kind of looks at this model of psychological need-based fulfillment as elements for game design, but you look at kind of the model that gets created there, and that's exactly what people need to stick to a subject, to get some sort of intrinsic satisfaction out of something that provides extrinsic rewards. So I'm going to use that as a segue, because that's a thing I can do. What are the challenges you face in attaching rewards to in-game or in classroom activities? I mean, what do you do to get people intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated? Candy coins aside.
Yeah, candy coins. So part of it is making the classroom a place where students want to be, and they always think that something awesome might happen there. So one of the definitions Jay McGonigal goes in whether it's a game is it has to have a goal. And unfortunately, a lot of students' goal is to get from now to then, and then is when the bell rings. And so if you give a place for joy in the classroom and make it as accessible as possible, students start wanting to do that. And so like in my language arts classroom, if we are learning complex sentences, teaching someone how to write a correct introductory clause sentence and a compound sentence and using an appositive can get pretty dull. I want to do it because I don't want to have to read subject, verb, object sentences all year. So it is very important for me to do, and I really wanted to find a way for students to get into using them. And so I went back, and one of the sources of games that we use to get students up and moving in my classroom, some of the games I learned when I was a high school theater student. And theater games are great for this type of thing, because if you get students up and they are having to tell a story, and there's 5 of them in front of the classroom, and the last one out wins, doesn't have to win anything, but they have to use the sentences that they're telling. Now it's not practice, now it's competition, and it's awesome because the students who are watching them are also looking for somebody who gets a mistake, and so they're also learning it. And so it is very much, getting some of those human needs for competition or cooperation or both can get some of that intrinsic motivation to work on stuff that is hard to find intrinsic motivation for.
Yeah, and I would just, the only thing I would add would be that sometimes it's not even about the extrinsics. I mean, we play games not even for those extrinsic things. We love the games we play. We get immersed in it. It's the characters that we love. It's the stories that we love. It's not even about, oh, I got 5 points. It has nothing to do with that after a while. So if you can create a game that feels that way, that feels like progress, that feels meaningful, that doesn't necessarily have it, then you can start to ignore those extrinsic rewards where what you're doing is you just want to play that game because it's enjoyable and you feel attached to it. And we've all felt that. And I would say it's also about feeling like you're making progress, right? That's why we play games, because we feel like we're always getting better, we're moving along, and we stop playing the games when we just never feel like we're getting anywhere. So if your game in your classroom or the games that you use, if kids feel like they're making that progress, even if they're not getting points, but they're making progress, that's good too.
It can also be, as Christian talked about earlier, a form of building social capital. That students that are in a classroom that may, I teach in the middle school. There are kids who feel excluded. This is not a surprise to anyone. But having those cooperative games or those shared experiences where they're working towards a common goal as a class or towards a common goal as a team can encourage kids to bring those kids in, so that some of that alienation or that those feelings of being excluded can be ameliorated a bit. That students are building social capital because they are working together towards a common goal.
Yeah, and going back to what Mr. Bort was saying about that these games made the classroom a fun place to be in. I know that the first time that I ever did one of his games, it was one of the most enjoyable times, because I've done Jeopardy like a billion times before in every classroom. And the first time that I went through one of his games, it was such an eye-opening change that all I wanted to do after that was play more review games like that. And Mr. Bort did a really good job of setting it up so that every time there was a test, you knew there was going to be a review game right before, and it allowed the students to want to come to school, to want to learn about the content, and really have and take the time out of their I guess they can't really leave, but it was just enjoyable for them to learn about the content, and they actually start looking forward to it a lot more. Awesome.
So we've got about 20 minutes left, and we want this to be kind of a participatory thing. We have a microphone up front if people want to start queuing to ask questions, either of the panelists, no small number, or share some stories of your own with games in the classroom.
I said I'd try.
Knock over there.
Hey guys, thanks for your time today. My day job is as a U.S. Navy commander, but I also do Navy ROTC scholarship interviews from time to time. And one of the things that I actually ask the students that are coming up to me is, do you participate in World of Warcraft? Do you participate in EVE Online? Some of the parents look at me a little funny and I say, look, leadership, research, tactics,
Yeah.
math, social skills, again, leadership. Unfortunately, what I also have to find out about is grade point average, standardized testing. My question's for you with regards to, is there studies, is there data points that would point you towards be able to, you can say, hey, look at this over here. This is showing that my tactic of using games in the classroom is giving better scores on standardized tests, better scores on the AP exams, better scores in the GPA category.
I can talk a little bit about, slightly related to that is that project-based learning, which is another area that I'm interested in. Very similar to game-based learning, there is research out there that students perform better, and they feel like, and they do a lot of data points around actually being more of a learner and stuff like that. So I think there is data out there. I mean, I've got a folder full of articles, and so if somebody wants to email me at, I'm happy to send out those resources that we could support it.
Wanna throw our emails up on the
Yeah, we'll throw the emails here at the end here. Whoops. So if at any time, you have a question about that, this is what again, I want to be a cultural broker too and support this. So I know there is data out there to support it. I have to go digging for you though, particularly.
Yeah, I have not seen specific data on that aside from what I can see in my classroom. Again, I'm at a middle school level, so I don't have as much familiarity with the AP tests or the HISP or what but some of the great growth in games doesn't show up on the data at a first blush. I'm thinking of, I just got back my MSP scores for this year, and I had one kid who really got into my games, and he's a student with an IEP. He struggled in schooling, and he came in and his reading score was, I think it was initially a 351 when he came into my classroom. He got a 397 when he left. 400 is passing, so on all of the data it just shows up did not pass. And I don't really care about that because he went from a 351 to a 397, and that's great growth. And so I don't know of any specific digging into the games, but they're probably out there. And if it's not, look at this room. This data is coming at some point.
Yeah, and she is.
I have two quick suggestions. Institute of Play,
Yeah.
ASU Center for Games and Impact, Joan Gansky Center,
Yeah.
Class 5.
Yeah, no, those are two really good ones. So Institute of Play, I know a lot of they have their schools, right? In the one in Chicago and one in New York. And then there's you say, what is it?
The Joan Gansky Center and
Yeah.
ASU Center for Games and Impact.
Yeah, ASU Centers for Games and Impact, again, James Paul G's little brainchild. There is research out there to support it. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you.
So currently I teach driver's ed, but I am in the process of getting my degree for junior high and high school mathematics and ESL. And through those three things, I run into a lot of kids that really struggle with English. And I also run into a lot of kids that go, oh, why? Every time I start talking. So, because I'm like, all right guys, today we're going to talk about driver's ed things that involve you being safe. And they're just like, uh-huh. So, generally speaking, I've only got them for 5 weeks, and I can usually keep them, focused for those 5 weeks. But I'm terrified of that 5 week span getting longer when I actually have a school and a classroom. So, what do I do with those ESL kids to keep them engaged for longer than a few weeks?
So actually, one area that when I went into teaching, I was not ESL trained, and I was in the Federal Way School District 2 where I started, and huge population ELL, lots of second language learners, and that's everywhere, first of all. And I think the one area is to, first of all, get some professional growth on that, find the books to help you, because teachers need more professional development on ELL and stuff. Ironically though, I know, for example, Peggy Seehee, who does work with World of Warcraft in the classroom. She works with special ed kids, and anybody who does World of Warcraft knows the level of reading that you have to get in. It's intense, And so I think, and she's done it with these kids who hate reading.
Okay.
They hate reading. And then they play World of Warcraft and they want to read. So
Yeah.
if you can find maybe some text-based games
Okay.
that really, where the game is fun and one must read to accomplish, you're creating the need to read, the engagement to read. I think that's going to help a lot.
And if you can find a classroom-based game where you can leverage the highly capable and the mid-range students in your classroom to assist those ELL kids in a way that they're not going to feel like, I have nothing to contribute, but they can contribute, they just need a little bit of assistance. There are ways that they can go, okay, I want to help, and then other students can help them out because other students.
And I know I'll have options of having a classroom that's unified, and then I'm gonna have classrooms, depending on what school district I go to, where it's, oh, well, all the ELL kids go here for half the day. But it's 7, 8, 9 languages and trying to explain, one book to all at the same time. So I'm just trying to figure out how to kind of bridge that gap, but doing it through games sounds really fun. Also, how do you decide what to do for groups? Do you pick the groups or the kids pick their own?
The age-old question of grouping in classrooms. I will tell you this, there is no wrong answer. There really isn't.
I know it totally depends on the
yeah.
classroom, but I was wondering how exactly
Yeah.
how you do it for your history class.
It is very much going to depend on the class, as he said. This last year, my first period class, after I got to know them for a couple of months, they got to pick their own groups, and they were very, very good at it.
Okay.
Other classes, it's experience and hunches. I tend, like for my extremely highly capable students, I really tend
Spread them out.
to, well, in some ways spread them out, but I don't want to spread them out too much because I want them to have someone that they can talk to in their group on their level.
Okay.
And matching students who are at the very bottom of the spectrum currently with students at the very top, it's almost like I'm talking to them and they're speaking different languages. So like students in the middle are my best friend because they get to work with students at the bottom, and they get pulled up by students at the top. So it's going to depend on the population of the room, and as he said, there's no wrong answer, but there's no right answer either. So I get a little bit better each time, and then if the groups aren't working, I change them.
And as a student, do you feel like you enjoy having your groups picked, or do you feel like, or does it does it also depend?
Well, okay, for the games, I enjoyed, obviously I enjoyed picking the groups because then I got to be with my friends who were good. But before the games, it's more like the games are really good about building a team. And so if you have a classroom that like doesn't necessarily like each other, then you can put random people in random groups, and then they're forced to work together, and they build these relationships and stuff like that. But I mean, obviously, it's classroom based, basically the classroom is.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
First of all, is this video available?
It probably will be. I'm going to preview it first to make sure there's nothing really silly behind me right now. But
Okay.
yes, my plan right now is to put it on YouTube at some point somewhere. So yeah.
Cool. So what are the challenges to implement, say, a video game into teacher curriculum?
Like what are the challenges? Or
Yeah,
just
what are
like,
the challenges? So you have a set curriculum and there's maybe a game that you want to implement into your curriculum. How do you do that? Or what are the challenges, I suppose?
I think the first step is you have to know what that game does well.
Okay.
Like you have to know what skills does the game work on? Is it reading skills? Is it geography content? Like you have to know what it is, and then you have to align it to standards. Whether we're talking about Common Core, or we're talking about just state standards, or next generation science standards, or whatever you're doing, you have to know what the game does, and that means you got to play it. So I encourage any teachers that want to do it, play the game, because the more you play the game, the more you know. Okay, so it really helps with this skill or whatever. I'm not seeing this one, so I'm not going to use it in that unit of instruction, but I'll use it here. So I think that's the main thing. You really have to know what the game does well.
I'm just going to be, taking a wild guess here because I haven't tried for video games in the classroom because we haven't had the technology. I'm hoping sometime in this year, the next couple of years to give it a shot. As he was saying, have a goal with it. It does nobody any good to go, I want to play a video game in my classroom. Why? Because it's a video game. I would love to do that, but I would also like to have a job next year. So find something that has a goal that fits what you are doing already in the classroom, and you think it can do it better, and be prepared to justify it. And again, have relationships with the people above you. Be able to go to your principal and say, this is my goal, this is what I want to do, this is the data I'm going to keep on it, and see what happens.
Do you have advice for, go ahead.
One of my favorite examples of how you implement them are text-based video games, because if they're crafted well, they are almost as fun as moving around the keyboard and 3D. But it just works on reading so much, and if they have a nice storyline and a bunch of branching things, you can play them over and over again and get a bunch of reading content and stuff.
Do you have a recommendation for developers to reach teachers?
Email me.
Well, you mean like if we were to give advice to developers out there or something?
Yeah.
Work with teachers. I know it sounds silly, but they just live there, and I'm like, we're over here. We're in the classroom. So I encourage developers to find classrooms, to work with teachers, to talk with teachers about these challenges that we're facing around standardized testing and standards, so that you can really go, no, really, I understand, rather than just developing these games in a silo. You've got to know the experience of schools and kids and teachers. Otherwise, it's not going to get anywhere, and we're fighting a losing battle in these two opposite areas. Yeah.
Could I just show up and take notes? Is that actually a resource that developers have if I knew a couple of teachers?
Well, don't just show up. Talk to me first. Who are you? Did you sign up in the office? No. Okay. Yeah. Security's coming. Find teachers. Schools run background checks of people coming in to do various things. You can universities do research in classrooms all the time. If game developers want to work and they have a goal, I don't see why there would be any difference. I haven't tried yet, but I don't see a problem. Do you have a statement?
Yeah, Tacoma Public Schools had a professional learning community last year called Gamify Your Classroom. Reaching out through professional learning communities is one way. I would definitely.
What she said was that last year Tacoma Public Schools had a PLC, a professional learning community, for teachers to gamify their classrooms. And so there are these teacher organizations around that developers can contact or look for.
Awesome. And also finding teachers that are gamers, you tend to have a better conversation when you both can understand.
Find your gamer allies.
Yeah, use your gamer allies. There's gamer teachers.
Not to us.
Pick your favorite content area, really.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I know exactly.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm learning the Common Core standards right now. We're getting really into knowing how to read informational text. And this summer, I was playing a lot of Skyrim, and I have my manual out, and I was like, oh my god, I know how to flip through and find chapters and read lists and cross-reference lists and everything. And I was wondering, is that something that you would be interested if I brought in a bunch of game manuals to my classroom and okay, show me how to make a potion?
I absolutely love reading manuals because you understand the game before you play it, and it gives you a little edge sometimes. Sometimes I just like playing the games, but manuals are great, and it's a simple way of having a colorful manifold for students to learn from and gather information from. Right?
I love that idea. I'm writing it down.
Okay, I actually was going to ask you how I have this idea, but it's tiny right now. So how do I make that into something that I can implement to an entire class?
I think you just did.
Yeah.
No, give it a shot and send us an email. We're happy to give you feedback on it. Specifically, but I think since you said you know your standards, just really it's got to be laser-like. So when you create, if you have them reading a manual, what are the questions or prompts that you're giving it? Is it summarizing informational text? Is it inferring? Is it analyzing? Is it vocabulary related? You got to know, like as he said, what's your target,
Yeah.
and that will help really flesh it out and frankly make it more viable because you're saying, no, look at we are doing these reading skills, not just we're doing reading, which is just so not clear.
You said that you were a student teacher in the future, or?
Yeah, winter 2015.
Okay. Use the experience at your building. That even if your mentor teacher is not a gamer and has never gamified their classroom before, the people who tend to get student teachers are looking for them because they want new ideas. And teachers who have been in the building for a while are good at creating lesson plans and finding out what the targets are. So if you go up to your mentor teacher and say, hey, I'm a student teacher, I have this idea, I don't know how to take it from these amorphous, this would be awesome and I think it would do this, into a unit plan, use the resources of people who have been doing that for a decade or more. And so use those resources.
Hi, thanks for doing the panel.
Yeah.
I'm a science educator at a small science center in Montana. And one of my absolute favorite things to do is I have students create their own board games and their own arcade games, create their own rule sets, and then teach each other. So how do you feel about having the students make games in the classroom?
I love it. I think it's great, and sometimes you will end up with games that are games because it says game on the top of the paper. Sometimes you'll end up with games like, I'm going to use this for the next 15 years. And so if you will get different depths of knowledge depending on how you create the assignment. And if it's just a standard, we're playing Monopoly and you have to go around the board and you land on a square and it's answer this question. Yeah, great. I mean, it's the student had to know this question and the answer, and they're putting it together in a way that has some creativity. I think it's great if you have your students that are able to say, okay, this is the concept. Can you go to the Egypt slide? The one I did on the board.
This one right here.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to read this one, but this is what I do for my Ancient Egypt unit, which they're actually farming the Nile and they're worrying about the floods and things like that. And if students can take the concepts that they know, not just the information, but the concepts, and make those concepts into game mechanics, then you really know they know what's going on and they've got it in here. So it's a great thing to do. You're going to get a wide range of results. But when it works, it really works.
Yeah, and it's another example of, again, performance assessment. By creating a game that shows content, you know that they've learned that content, as Jeremy's saying. And the other thing I would say is it's a great way to jigsaw content. We always worry about, oh my gosh, I have not enough time. Fine, not everybody has to do the same game. You got that part, you got that part, you got that part, and now we'll teach each other. And we just saved a whole week. So it's a great way to save time because we're always concerned about time as educators.
There's a panel tomorrow about
Game
failing.
building.
Yeah,
It's
it's
about
about
making,
having students do game
making
design.
games in the classroom for students. So that's a panel you might want to.
Remind me that there's a panel tomorrow about this very same subject. Thank you.
It's
you very much.
isn't that for college?
What time is it? What time is that panel in what room? Does anyone know?
It's
I will pull it
11 something.
The learning to fail.
Yeah.
11 a.m. at Labyrinth.
Yes.
11 a. It's at 11 a.m. in Labyrinth.
Wyvern.
Wyvern. What was the library?
I don't know.
Anyway.
Thank you so much for this panel. It's great to listen to it. I work for a company that's been successfully creating and implementing digital games in the classroom for the last 10 years. And I love the stuff that you're doing when you're unable to do that. It's Muzzy Lane, I don't know. From Massachusetts.
What's the name of it?
Muzzy
Give it a bigger
Lane
plug,
software?
it's fine.
Yeah. So we've had at least a dozen games from, mainly high school, higher ed, but some middle school. But what I loved about what Jeremy's doing is when we first started, just putting games in the classroom, we were, it was the wilderness, like we want to play Grand Theft Auto in the classroom. But teachers were the ones that were totally behind it. The problem was the layers you have to go through to implement it into the schools. You know, you're not, in other words, you're not selling to the people who are using it. You're selling to a district or administration. And that can add a lot of extra layers of problems for developers. Just point that out to people who are developing. But I love what Jeremy's doing, and I think the one question I had was, the roadblock I see there is you. Like, all teachers aren't you. Maybe they don't have your theater background. Maybe they don't have the wherewithal to develop some game mechanics to implement in the classroom. So how do you scale that?
That's a
Yeah.
really good question that I wish I knew the answer to.
So
Just stop the battle.
okay, no, I would say this. I do a lot of work with professional development. How do you scale something, no matter what that subject is? You never go into a district and you say we're going to do it. It doesn't work. You start with your early adopters. You find the people that are working and doing the good work, and you nurture them. That's all you do. And by nurturing them, the seeds are planted, people get excited about it, people want to do it, and you start bringing everyone into the fold. I mean, that's what you got to do. Find the people who want to do the good work and nurture them. That's how it scales.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's our.
Okay.
If
We are not going anywhere.
No,
Well,
we're
we're going
We're
somewhere.
going outside,
We're
but
gonna
we'll
go
be here.
outside, and we can do
Outside the doors.
we can do the outside the mini panel thing. But we are out of time. Everyone, thank you very much for coming.